UP Institute of Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea Director, Jay Batumbakal, says that on its face, this new Chinese law should be a non-issue for countries other than China. But drawing on China's past actions, Batumbakal says it's a logical.
A pleasant morning to everyone. Welcome to the virtual press conference of the Philippine Statistics Authority for the performance of the Philippine economy in the fourth quarter and full year 2020, held today, 28th of January 2021. I am Angeli Icardo of the PSA, your host for this event. Before we start, we would like to inform everyone that we are live streamed to the PSA Facebook page. Updates are also tweeted on the PSA Twitter page using the hashtag PHGDP. We are honored today to be joined by our resource persons, Acting Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Kenrick Chua of the National Economic and Development Authority, and from the Philippine Statistics Authority, we have Undersecretary Dennis Mapa, our National Statistician and Civil Registrar General. Now, let us listen to Undersecretary Mapa, who will be reporting on the performance of the Philippine economy in the fourth quarter and full year 2020.
Good morning, everyone. The Philippine Statistics Authority will now report the performance of the Philippine economy for the fourth quarter and full year 2020. The gross domestic product growth rate declined at a rate of negative 8.3% in the fourth quarter of 2020, taking down the annual growth rate to negative 9.5% for the full year of 2020. Growth rates of gross national income or GNI and net primary income or NPI from the rest of the world both declined at a rate of negative 12.0% and negative 53.2% respectively in the fourth quarter of 2020. On an annual basis, NPI growth rate declined at a rate of negative 27.3%, driving the GNI growth rate to negative 11.1% in 2020. On a seasonally adjusted basis, GDP and GNI posted positive quarter-on-quarter growth rates of 5.6% and 2.9% respectively in the fourth quarter of 2020. For the fourth quarter of 2020, all three major economic sectors posted contractions. Agriculture, industry, and services posted growth rates of negative 2.5%, negative 9.9%, and negative 8.4% respectively. On an annual basis, industry posted the largest contraction with negative 13.1% growth rate for the whole year of 2020. Services and agriculture also posted negative growth rates of negative 9.1% and negative 0.2% in 2020 respectively. On a seasonally adjusted basis, industry and services posted positive quarter-on-quarter growth rates of 11.6% and 4.5% respectively. On the other hand, agriculture posted quarter-on-quarter decline at a rate of negative 4.1% in the fourth quarter of 2020. With the country's projected population capita GDP growth rate declined at a rate of negative 9.5% from a 5.1% growth rate in the same quarter of the previous year. Meanwhile, growth rates of per capita GNI and per capita household final consumption expenditure also posted contractions of negative 13.2% and negative 8.4% respectively. On an annual basis, per capita GDP, per capita GNI, and per capita household final consumption expenditure growth rates are negative 10.7%, negative 12.3%, and negative 9.1% respectively in 2020. These were 4.5%, 3.7%, and 4.4% respectively in 2019. All three major economic sectors pulled down the growth of the economy in the fourth quarter of 2020. Agriculture, industry, and services contributed negative 0.3 percentage points, negative 3.1 percentage points, and negative 4.9 percentage points, respectively. Similarly, all major economic sectors pulled down the economic growth in 2020 on an annual basis. Agriculture, industry, and services pulled down the annual growth by negative 0.02 percentage point for agriculture, negative 4.0 percentage points for industry, and negative 5.5 percentage points for services. Other services, which consist of institutions providing personal care services and entertainment, arts, and recreation services, such as saloons, casinos, and museums, contracted the most in the fourth quarter of 2020 with a growth rate of negative 45.2%. This was followed by accommodation and food service activities with a growth of negative 42.7%, construction with negative 25.3%, and transportation and storage with negative 21.3%. On the other hand, financial and insurance activities, which consist of banking and non-banking institutions providing financial services, posted the highest growth rate in the fourth quarter of 2020 with 4.4%. This was followed by information and communication with 3.6% and public administration and defense with 0.6%. On an annual basis, accommodation and food service activities showed the largest contraction of negative 44.7%, followed by other services with negative 41.8%, transportation and storage with negative 31.2%, and construction with negative 26%. On the other hand, financial and insurance activities posted the highest growth rate in 2020 with 5.8%, followed by information and communication with 5.1%, and public administration and defense with 4.4%. Major contributors to the decline in the GDP growth during the fourth quarter of 2020 were constructions with negative 2.1 percentage points, other services with negative 1.0 percentage point, and accommodation and food service activities with negative 0.9 percentage point. On the other hand, positive contributors to the GDP growth in the fourth quarter of 2020 were financial and insurance activities with 0.3 percentage point, followed by information and communication with 0.1 percentage point, and public administration and defense with 0.03 percentage point. For the whole year 2020, major contributors to the decline in the GDP from the production side were construction with negative 2.0 percentage points, manufacturing with negative 1.8 percentage points, and transportation and storage with negative 1.2 percentage points. Positive contributors to the 2020 full year GDP growth rate were financial and insurance activities with 0.5 percentage point, public administration and defense with 0.2 percentage point, and information and communication with 0.1 percentage point. On the demand side, imports of services posted the largest contraction with negative 36.4% during the fourth quarter of 2020. This was followed by construction with negative 34.0%, valuables with negative 26.9%, and durable equipment with negative 24.7%. Meanwhile, government final consumption expenditure and intellectual property products posted positive growth rates during the fourth quarter of 2020 with 4.4% and 1.3% respectively. For the whole year of 2020, on the demand side, valuables posted the largest contraction with 43.1%, followed by durable equipment with negative 31.3%, construction with negative 29.7%, and exports of services with negative 25.5%. Meanwhile, government final consumption expenditure posted positive growth of 10.4% for the whole year of 2020. In the fourth quarter of 2020, major contributors to the decline from the expenditure side were construction with negative 5.9 percentage points, followed by household final consumption expenditure with negative 5.4 percentage points, and durable equipment with negative 1.7 percentage points. On the other hand, major positive contributors to the GDP growth for the fourth quarter of 2020 were net exports with 4.4 percentage points, government final consumption expenditure with 0.5 percentage point, and intellectual property products with 0.01 percentage point. On an annual basis, major contributors to the decline in the GDP growth from the expenditure side for 2020 were household final consumption expenditure with negative 5.7 percentage points, construction with negative 4.9 percentage points, and durable equipment with negative 2.3 percentage points. On the other hand, major positive contributors to the GDP growth in 2020 were net exports with 3.9 percentage points and government final consumption expenditure with 1.3 percentage points. The Philippine Statistics Authority appreciates your presence in this fourth quarter 2020 National Accounts Press Conference. We look forward to meeting you again on 11th May 2021 when we report the performance of the Philippine economy for the first quarter of 2021. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Mapa, for your informative report. Next, to deliver the joint statement of the Duterte administration's economic managers on the Philippine economic performance for the fourth quarter and full year 2020, we have Acting Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua of the National Economic and Development Authority.
2019. We earned an unprecedented upgrade in our credit rating, which allowed us to access funds for our priority programs at concessional rates and favorable terms. These enabled us to sustainably fund the Build, Build, Build program and provide more and better social services to the people. As a result, both the unemployment and underemployment rates also fell to historic low levels. In other words, we had realized better economic and social outcomes for the Filipino people. However, COVID-19 disrupted our growth momentum and development trajectory. To address this unprecedented crisis, the government made the difficult decision of imposing community quarantines, as it put a premium on saving lives and protecting communities from the virus, while beefing up our healthcare capacity. This is not without any consequence. Like any policy decision that comes with trade-offs, this one came at a huge cost to the economy and the people. When we restricted the economy in the second quarter of 2020, GDP fell by 16.9% and the unemployment rate rose to 17.7%. However, improvements were seen with the gradual easing of restrictions. In the third quarter, we had a much slower GDP contraction of 11.4%. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, the economy even grew by 8%. Unemployment rate also dropped quickly to 8.7%. In the fourth quarter of 2020, our economy performed better with a smaller GDP contraction of minus 8.3%. This brings the full year GDP contraction to minus 9.5%, which is at the low end of the DBCC estimate of minus 8.5 to minus 9.5% for 2020. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, the economy grew by 5.6%. This improvement was the result of the further reopening of businesses and wider accessibility of public transport since October 2020. However, it also shows the limits of economic recovery without any major relaxation of our quarantine policy. On the demand side, private consumption, which comprises some 70% of GDP, remained weak with a minus 7.2% growth. While the government relaxed the restriction in the supply side by allowing more public transport and establishments to operate, restrictions on the demand side, notably on the mobility of children and hence families, prevented private consumption from making a stronger comeback. The Philippines has a young population where the median age is 25 years old. 40% of our population is below 20 years old. Economic growth will be hard-pressed to make a stronger recovery if children and families are restricted from participating in the economy, as up to 50% of non-essential retail sales are driven by family spending. Consequently, our quarantine restrictions reduced household spending by 801 billion pesos in 2020, or an average of around 2.2 billion pesos per day. The fall in consumption translates into a total income loss for families of around 1.04 trillion pesos in 2020, or an average of around 2.8 billion pesos per day. On a per capita basis, annual family income declined by some 23,000 pesos per worker, but this average masks wide differences across sectors and jobs. Some workers were hit much harder, while others lost their jobs completely. Nevertheless, we see green shoots of recovery. Investment had a slower contraction of minus 29% from minus 41.6% in the previous quarter. Both private and public constructions saw improvements, but inter-province travel restrictions have prevented many workers from going back to work. Moreover, international travel restrictions and the resurgence of the virus in advanced economies also affected the pace of construction, as their experts had a difficult time coming to the Philippines. The government's infrastructure program was 10% higher relative to the program levels, according to the DBM. However, when compared to the high base in the fourth quarter of 2019, it was 32.5% lower, given the government's catch-up plan following the delayed congressional approval of the 2019 budget. Meanwhile, government consumption grew by 4.4% despite the high base in 2019. As of December 31, 2020, 109 billion pesos have been released under Bayanihan 2. On the external account, the slower contraction of exports at minus 10.5% compared to minus 14.4% in the previous quarter shows that external demand is picking up as neighboring economies improve. For instance, China's economy grew by 6.5%, while Vietnam's economy expanded by 4.5%. On the other hand, with consumer demand and investment constricted, imports contracted by minus 18.8%. On the supply side, further opening of the economy led to smaller contractions in industry, manufacturing, and services growth. However, agriculture performance deteriorated and contracted by 2.5% due to a series of typhoons, flooding, and the African swine flu. 6 typhoons, namely Typhoon Nika, Ophel, Pepito, Quinta, Rolly, and Ulysses, caused some 16.6 billion pesos worth of losses and damage to agriculture. To prevent further spread of the disease, some 432,000 hogs were culled. The prospects for 2021 are encouraging. With the continuous calibrated reopening of businesses and mass transportation and the relaxation of age group restrictions, we will see more economic activity in the months ahead. This will lead to a strong recovery before the end of the year, when the government will have rolled out enough vaccines against COVID-19 for a majority of our people. The Development Budget Coordination Committee estimates that the economy will grow by 6.5 to 7.5% in 2021 and by 8 to 10% in 2022. The Duterte administration's efforts to increasingly open the economy while taking resolute steps to fast-track the vaccination program and keep COVID-19 caseload to the lowest level possible would boost consumer and business confidence that are crucial to a robust economic recovery. All of these efforts to contain the coronavirus and revive the economy will allow us to prevent long-term economic scarring and productivity losses and recover to pre-pandemic level by mid-2022. Our early progress in reducing poverty and attaining most of the 10-point socioeconomic agenda by midterm or in 2019 has prepared the country better and put it in a more solid path to recovery. Our experience in 2020 shows that the economy is strong enough to recover if we enable it to do so. With the productive sectors of the economy strengthened by our fiscal and economic reforms and by our infrastructure program, we see no reason why the economy cannot bounce back once community quarantines are further relaxed. The halving of the unemployment rate, as you see in this slide, and the hunger rates from the SWS from record highs as we gradually relax the quarantine in the second semester of 2020 shows the economic potential remains and only held back by excessive risk aversion. Further opening of the economy in 2021 will require a careful and calibrated approach given risks from new virus strains. However, prolonging the status quo of community quarantine and risk aversion is not an option. In 2020, we saw significant hardships among the people who were deprived of jobs and income that led to more hunger, more poor people, higher prevalence of other sicknesses, far more deaths from non-COVID reasons, and other lost opportunities. Proactively managing the risk and striking a better balance between protecting the people from COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 problems is the only way to go. And the people are with us. For instance, in surveys conducted by SWS and Pulse Asia, 39% of respondents in September 2020 say the government needs to balance the opening of the economy and jobs and controlling the spread of the virus. In November 2020, this has gone up to 73%. The people have spoken. Further opening the economy will entail increasing public transport capacity, allowing gradual face-to-face schooling beginning with pilot cases, and broadening the age group allowed to go out, all with the appropriate safeguards. We will continue to evaluate both economic and health data to make a more informed decision so that the holistic welfare of the people is pursued. For instance, data shows that when the cabinet approved the further reopening of the economy beginning October 2020, COVID-19 cases did not spike, nor did it go up during the year-end holiday season. Starting January 2021, we will be conducting the labor force survey monthly so that we will be able to have more timely data on jobs and thus take more timely actions to address any emerging issues. Our experience in 2021 shows that many Filipinos have learned to live with the virus, are complying with the minimum health standards, and are able to manage the risks in their personal lives. Nonetheless, we remain vigilant given the emergence of new COVID-19 variants. To improve confidence, the government has allocated 72.5 billion pesos this year to provide vaccines to at least 50 million Filipinos. Rolling out these life-saving doses will allow us to safely open more of the economy and restore jobs and income to make our fight against hunger more sustainable. Alongside the prospects for a mass vaccination program, the higher government spending through Bayanihan 2 and the 2020 and 2021 budgets, as well as a swift congressional approval of our key legislative bills, would underpin economic recovery this year and onwards. The speedy implementation of Bayanihan 2, coupled with the extension of Bayanihan 2 to June 2021 and the 2020 budget to December 2021, will allow the government to spend some 195.3 billion pesos more in 2021. This translates to additional fiscal stimulus of around 1% of GDP in 2021. Another key driver is the 2021 budget, which amounts to around 4.5 trillion pesos or some 21.4% of GDP. This includes a budget of 1.1 trillion pesos for infrastructure, with a multiplier of 2.27, meaning every peso spent creates another 1.27 pesos. Some 1.7 million jobs can be created to accelerate the recovery. Timely implementation of infrastructure projects will have the biggest impact on our recovery prospects. The economic expansion will depend in part on how businesses, including micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, that employ the majority of workers, could recover and keep jobs or create new ones. The Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or CREATE bill, is the government's biggest stimulus ever for businesses and will primarily benefit MSMEs that account for 99% of local enterprises. We therefore urge both houses of Congress to conclude the bicameral conference on the CREATE so that businesses can avail of lower taxes and other benefits to aid in their recovery. All in all, CREATE will contribute 133 billion pesos worth of fiscal incentives in 2021. This is equivalent to 0.67% of GDP. The Financial Institutions Strategic Transfer or FIS bill will help banks free up capital and funds to lend to more businesses facing liquidity issues. According to the Bankers Association of the Philippines, this can free up some 700 billion pesos in capital to potentially provide up to 3.01 trillion pesos in additional lending. The swift passage of the Government Financial Institutions Unified Initiatives to Distress Enterprises for Economic Recovery, or the GUIDE bill, meanwhile, will help strategically important companies by helping them address any solvency issues. Congress could also ensure the long-term recovery of our economy by passing not only our economic bills on the recovery, but also other pending measures that are immediately doable to attract more foreign direct investments and create more and better jobs. We urge our legislators to swiftly pass the amendments to the Public Service Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, and the Foreign Investment Act. All these are crucial in revving up the Philippine economy and sustaining its recovery. These measures complement the other reforms we have done, such as the Build program, the Rice Tarification Law, and the Ease of Doing Business Act. To conclude, the year 2020 will be remembered as the most difficult year in our lives. The road ahead remains challenging, but there is now light at the end of the tunnel. 2021 will test everything. It will test our resiliency, our economic foundation, our healthcare system, and even our personal grit. Our resolve to work together for the common interest will spell the difference between recovering sooner or much later. The government is committed to deliver adequate, prudent, and timely policies and responses to help restore income opportunities and jobs. We assure the Filipino people we will not waste this crisis. Like before, we will turn this crisis into an opportunity to recover strongly and collectively build a better normal and a more inclusive society for many years ahead until our ambition natin 2040 vision where no one is poor is attained. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chua. Before we start the open forum, we are pleased to welcome our media partners joining us today via video conferencing. Please be reminded that your press kits will be provided through email. Before we begin the Q&A, allow me first to give some instructions so that we have an organized flow. To our media partners joining live, you may send your questions through the Zoom chat box, in which the host will first acknowledge your name and organization, followed by your question. Another option is to ask the question directly to the resource persons. And to do so, please first use the raise hand feature, then wait for the host to acknowledge you before you state your question. Now let's begin the Q&A. We have a question from Ms. Rita Reyes of GMA News addressed to NEDA. The question is, have they decided on the Department of Agriculture's request to lower tariff on pork imports? What impact will this have on the swine industry if tariffs are lowered and the minimum access volume is increased?
Thank you for the question. Our priority right now is to ensure that food supply is adequate so that households who have been affected by the COVID-19 and the quarantines will not be doubly affected by possible further spikes in inflation. So in general, we support the proposal of the Department of Agriculture. In fact, the Committee on Trade and Related Matters met and endorsed it, but it will have to go through the proper process under the CMTA law, and the Tariff Commission is going to immediately conduct the consultation and the due diligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. We have another question, this time from Ms. Eileen Mencinas of Abante. What can the Philippines learn from Vietnam's handling of the pandemic that allowed it to bounce back?
The Philippines has a lot to learn from all countries and their experiences, whether in the health side, in the economic side, or in the fiscal side. Vietnam has the experience of dealing with SARS-1 in 2003. It also has the experience in addressing other economic and concerns. So these are the things we are learning. And in fact, our prudent actions in the early part of the quarantine has enabled us, per the estimates of our epidemiologists, to save some 100,000 lives from the virus and prevent infections that are more than 1 million or 2 million. So these are the things that we have learned, and we will continue to do so. But going forward, we will have to strike a better balance between the COVID and the non-COVID issues, so that we provide a more holistic approach to pursuing the welfare of every Filipino. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Next question is from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ABS-CBN News. Question is, did the growth in government spending in the fourth quarter and full year 2020 meet the DBCC's desired level?
Well, in terms of program, we met the DBCC's target. In fact, on infrastructure, we are 10% ahead of the DBCC's target. However, when compared to 2019, in the second semester of 2019, if you recall, we implemented a massive catch-up plan for the budget because the congressional approval was delayed. So a lot of the spending were moved from the first semester of 2019 to the second semester of 2019. That is why the base is bigger, and that is why the growth is lower. But relative to our program and what the government has indicated, what we can spend, we achieved that by more than 10% in the case of infrastructure. Now, in 2021, we have the opportunity to spend the entire 2021 budget plus almost 200 billion that is allowed given the extension of Bayanihan 2 to June 2021 and the 2020 budget's extension to the end of 2021. So these two will provide additional fiscal stimulus for this year.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Next question is from Ms. Kai Ordinario of Business Mirror. The question is addressed to Secretary Chua. Until when can we continue the GCQ to prevent economic scarring? What would economic scarring do to the economy and what it means for poverty and hunger?
Well, as I mentioned in my remarks from the joint statement of the economic managers, our long-running community quarantine has already removed 801 billion pesos of spending in 2020. That's around 2.2 billion pesos per day. And if you include the effect on jobs and the multiplier, then the total income loss among families and individuals is already 1.4 trillion pesos in 2020, or an average of around 2.8 billion pesos per day. So that translates to significant employment loss, significant income loss, and for the most affected sectors, hunger and possibly higher poverty. And if students do not go back to school, according to ADB, that is more than 1 trillion peso lost productivity because of less accumulation of knowledge by the students and the parents not able to go back to work. So all of these are the facts, but they have to be balanced with the equally important concern about preventing the spread of COVID, especially the new strain, and preventing more deaths. Now, this is the most difficult policy decision that we have to make. But we have seen that a careful balance wherein we gradually open the economy, avoid prolonged quarantines, focus rather on localized quarantines, and implementing the minimum health standards actually can give us a better deal wherein we address both COVID while addressing also non-COVID problems of the people. So going forward, we cannot afford any more prolonged quarantines or risk aversion. We have to strike that better balance. And we will continue to use data, both from the economic and the health side, to inform our decision and our recommendation to the President. Thank you.
Secretary Chua, we have a follow-up question again from Ms. Kai. There are institutions who believe it would be better to give ayuda than give the funds to banks. What is your response to that?
Well, we are proposing a package of support. There is, I think, no point in giving more fiscal stimulus if, for instance, there is no confidence or consumer confidence to spend. There is no point in giving more subsidies if the families cannot even go out and spend. Also, there are different needs of businesses and the people. That is why NEDA and the government have been conducting consumer and business surveys. And the surveys show that first, they want deferment of their fixed payments of rental, loans, utilities, and we did that in Bayanihan 1 and 2. Second, they are requesting for deferment of taxes and lower taxes and carry over of their losses. And we did that in Bayanihan 2 and Create. We have given the ayuda or the subsidy or the SAP under Bayanihan 1 more broadly and more targeted under Bayanihan 2. And the 2021 budget has almost 100 billion, I understand, of cash transfer. So in other words, we have to give the support not only from one instrument, but from a package to address multiple concerns of businesses and individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Next question is from Andrea Calonzo of Bloomberg News, addressed to PSA. Is the full year 2020 GDP contraction an all-time low?
I believe from the PSA data, since they started collecting, yes. But if Yusek Dennis Mapa can answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Secretary. We started collecting annual data for the GDP in 1946, and the negative 9.5% 2020 growth rate is the lowest since 1946. The second one, for the information, happened in 1984, where GDP contracted by 7%. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek Mapa. Next question from Mr. Ralph Rivas of Rappler. Question is addressed to NEDA. Can you give us more details on infrastructure spending in the last quarter? Why did it slow down even though government is banking on infra spending to shore up the economy?
While I collect the data from DBM and come back to you, can we have the next question?
Question again from Mr. Rivas. How concerned is the government that Philippines will go back to pre-pandemic levels only by the latter part of 2022?
Sorry,
While-
say it again. Sorry, say it again because I was trying to find the data of Ralph. Say it again, please. The second question.
Okay, Secretary Chua. The question is, how concerned is the Philippine government that the Philippines will go back to pre-pandemic levels only by the latter part of 2022, while regional peers are expected to bounce back this year? How will it impact us in terms of competitiveness?
Let's look at it from this perspective. First of all, we had targeted in 2022 the achievement of two important economic milestones. The first is achieving upper middle income country status, and the second is reducing poverty by 6 million Filipinos. Our reforms and our economic management have resulted in the advancement of these targets. In the case of the upper middle income country target, prior to COVID, it would be 2020. And in case of the poverty, we actually achieved that almost in 2018, or 4 years ahead of schedule for poverty and 2 years ahead of schedule for the UMIC, or the upper middle income country status, prior to COVID. Now, in 2022, we will recover and we will still achieve both poverty, even slightly more advanced. We may achieve that earlier than 2022 despite the pandemic, and we will still be able to achieve right on target based on our original plan, the UMIC status. So all of these relative to our own performance and the targets we have set are actually on track. And if we work together to address the remaining issues around both COVID and non-COVID issues, then we will be able to achieve the 6 to 7%, 6.5 to 7.5% growth target this year, and the 8 to 10% growth target next year. And those two will put us right where we want to be based on our PDP targets. Now on the infrastructure spending, according to the preliminary data from the DBM, in the fourth quarter, the program was 178 billion pesos. The actual spending was 230 billion pesos. For the full year, the program was 609 billion pesos. The actual was 681 billion pesos. So, in other words, we have exceeded the program both for the fourth quarter and the full year on infrastructure disbursement. Again, as I mentioned, the reason why it is negative in the GDP accounts is we are comparing to the fourth quarter of 2019. where we had the highest ever infrastructure spending as a result of the catch-up plan in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chua. We have the next question from Ms. Riza Valencia of Philippine Star. Again, this is addressed to Secretary Chua. Will the spread of the new COVID strain delay the lowering of the age bracket for those allowed to go out, thus impacting the recovery in consumption? Please note that President Duterte expressed reservations about this last Monday.
Well, yes, it has. In fact, we wanted to pilot the face-to-face in January and reduce the age bracket in the lower risk areas or the MGCQ. The IETF has looked at both the economic and the health data, and we have presented to the President. However, the latest data on the new COVID variants came as we presented our proposal, and the President has taken the right decision to postpone these. And we will continue to look at both the economic and the health data, as well as our effort to have monthly labor force survey to better inform the President so that we can make the decisions as the situation improves. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. I think this is the last question from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ABS-CBN, addressed to both NEDA and PSA. How far away is government from using PhilSys to distribute financial aid? Will it be ready this year in case the pandemic continues?
Go ahead, Yusek Dennis.
Okay, thank you, Sec Carl. As you are all aware, we started with the registration to the national ID last year, and we were able to cover 10.5 million Filipinos. We targeted those that are from the low-income families. And starting this year, while last year's operation was limited to 32 provinces, starting January 18, we expanded the operation nationwide, all provinces, and we were able to register additional 1.5 million during the first 6 days of operation, again from the low-income families. Also, I'm happy to inform you that the step 2 registration, the capturing of the biometric information, already started in 6 provinces, in Laguna, Cavite, Batangas, Bataan, Zambales, and Rizal. And in the coming weeks, this will be expanded further to the 32 provinces that started last year. So to answer the question, yes, we are ready. Our registration process is ongoing, and we are capturing more Filipinos into the national ID. We are targeting between 50 to 70 million Filipinos registered this year. And since we're doing a targeting method, these are actually the priority areas that are covered to capture or to include them in financial inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Mapa. We would like to thank our honorable research persons, Acting Secretary Carl Chua and Undersecretary Dennis Mapa, for joining us today. To our media partners, we thank you for your active participation. Join us again in the PSA's press briefing for the January 2021 inflation report happening this coming February 5 at 9 a.m. Once again, I am Angeli Aicardo of the PSA, wishing you a good day ahead.